thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Mr. Vavi, you would not have been surprised by those disastrous figures we saw coming out yesterday from the Statistician General.
No, we were not, because I think if all of us looked at the GDP figures of the first quarter, where we learned, not by shock on our side, but we learned, we've discussed that the GDP had shrinked by a 3.2%, and that the first quarter we lost 200,000 jobs. Now we interact with the private sector more. Most of our unions, as the Startup Federation, are organizing in the coal front of the capitalist system, if we may say. The reports coming from our unions is that they are now beginning to be full-time managers of retrenchments. It's a notice after the notice, Section 189 after the next Section 189 is CCMA processes. The end result is that we are battling to save the jobs, and that workers in droves are being sent home to join now a 10.2 million South Africans who are waking up every day with able bodies, but who are unable to find employment opportunities. It's a crisis of unimaginable proportions. You can't even begin to describe in words what South Africa's economy means to particularly marginalized black majority in South Africa. And so when we saw the figures yesterday, obviously they were devastating. I mean, in anybody's book, I know you're talking 29%. Our correction to you is that now we're talking 38.5%.
Because there's an underreportage of these numbers as well.
Not only that. You remember Statistics South Africa only count people who have not been actively searching for employment opportunities for the past 2 weeks.
The discouraged workers is what
when you count the discouraged, it's 38.5. But in the discouraged workers, they also count anybody who wake up to go and sell bananas and apples in the corner of the street as employed. And so if you look at the report yesterday, they're saying in the second quarter they have been, that's the only sector that has been growing. It grew by 114,000.
They call it the informal sector.
Those are people who are cutting our hair in a corner of a street somewhere in Alexander. And so if you were to count them as unemployed, as we should, that 38.5% will even be bigger.
Now, you wrote a piece that was published just last month, and you speak there that the economic situation South Africa finds itself in is largely as a result of disastrous neoliberal policies. Some would put it to you, it's because of the last decade or so, there's been a distinct lack of policy direction from a ruling party that right now is at war with itself.
I wouldn't count 10 years, I would count 24 years. I'll count 25 years of dithering, of policy zigzags, of contradictory stances, of moving left and then suddenly turn right, of sometimes giving us a nice left-wing rhetoric only to act right in a manner that favors the interest of the rich and the most powerful in society. Unfortunately, this has been the story of the ANC. Let's take an example. One of the most disastrous policy positions that were taken in 1994 was to open South Africa up to what they called the chilly winds of international competition. They removed the tariffs even faster than what was required by the WTO and got before the WTO's existence. So we're given up to 12 years, and we removed those tariffs faster. Some 9 years, 10 years, they were gone. We were left with no protections. Whilst we were doing so, we had no industrial policy, nothing to guide us as to which of the industries gives us a competitive advantage, which others we can sort of let go because we will not be able to compete with country A, B, C, D, or all of the countries. We didn't have a strategy. We walked straight into a new South Africa without a new growth path plan, without an industrial policy strategy. Only after 2010 did we produce an industrial policy plan and a growth path plan. It was too late already. And the bolt have already...
the horse has already bolted.
It has already bolted, and the rest is history. We are now finding ourselves, and let's be frank with each other, we've now reached the rock bottom. We were number 6 country in the entire world, and we could only compete in that space of being number 6 with countries in deep wars. That's our rate of unemployment. Now at 38% broader definition, and with with 7 of the 9 provinces hitting unemployment rate of about 40%. You can't tell me there's something worse than that. We're only 2 provinces below 40, and they are not doing pretty well. Western Cape at 23% and Gauteng at 35%. That's a disaster. When you look at that unemployment figure, 10.2 million, over 60% of it are young people. And they don't have metrics, and they are the face of that unemployment. And what does that talk to? Our dysfunctional public education system, and it then talks to the fact that the young people are being robbed of their future. And that's why we're seeing a phenomenal growth of the drug epidemics in many townships across the
it feeds into crime statistics.
That's why we're talking about the crisis of crime. That's why we're talking about young people being recruited by the drug lords and the kingpins of gangsterism.
Because they have no other options.
They have no options. They are easy target to be recruited left, right, and center by these people. And so, before we know it, we get police telling us that on average, South Africa have 57 people that die violently. And they tell us that they have only a 48% chance of identifying people who are committing crime, and that their success rate in the courts is 15%. So all of these things, when we have such an economy that simply marginalizes the majority, you're bound to have all of these other social ills in society. And that's where we are. Now, you add ESCOM, 420 billion rands in debt. It needed 59 billion to be saved, and it reported yesterday that it lost 20 billion rands. And the people who are responsible for that are given higher positions.
Absolutely, and it's almost unimaginable. Unfortunately, we are pressed for time. I'm going to ask you that there's even COSATU has come out today going after their tripartite alliance leaders, saying there's been a lack of leadership. The president is under the cosh, being accused of not being decisive. In 30 seconds, if you could speak to President Cyril Ramaphosa and say if there are 2 things you could do immediately to stop the rot, what would that be?
Adopt a mentality that we are in a crisis that requires decisive action. Call stakeholders into a real discussion and don't exclude any others, such as we are being excluded as the 2nd biggest federation in the country. And let's begin to talk a discussion, or let's start a discussion about a Marshall Plan for South Africa. And that's what we need. Anything short of that is not going to take us anywhere. So far, we are tinkering around the crisis. We've not ever in 25 years gone into the crisis and say, these are the decisive types of steps we need to take to get out of the situation.
Thank you so much for that. That is the General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, Zwelinzima Vavi. Thank you so much for your insight this afternoon.